At the moment, there isn't really any new content coming out. There's not too many movies in this week, I should say. There obviously are in coming weeks, but at this moment in time, I kind of had a dry patch on my schedule where I didn't have any videos planned. So, you know, when I have these spots without any ideas, I tend to chuck in an old classic ranking, normally movie ranking, but as I've been a gamer for many years, I've always played, you know, some of the big titles. Mainly story games is what I'm into. I enjoy and do play some multiplayer stuff, but that's not really my strong suit. Starting back last year, I began playing through the Bioshock games, and recently I finished the third one, Bioshock Infinite. So I thought now was a great time to rank all three of the games. I'm not including the DLCs because I haven't played them, so I'm just including the main Bioshock games. Now, I could have waited a couple of years to do this ranking, as apparently there's going to be a fourth one coming out sometime in the coming years, but since it's fresh in my mind, I thought now's a great time to rank these ones. So without further ado, let's get into it. Coming in at third and last place is Bioshock 2, hence the title, obviously a follow-up to Bioshock. Having it in last place, don't let this take anything away from the game. It's still a good game. It is a very solid follow-up to the original Bioshock. It practically feels like an instant continuation of that game on a visual side, except for some minor changes with the loadout. Some changes which actually improve on that and make it neater or easier to access. Most noticeably with hacking into devices, that was a lot easier, whereas before you had to, you know, flip all these panels to match up the pipes. Here it's just a simple timing of the click, and I enjoyed that and found that a lot more easier, which made me use hacking more in this game than I did in the original. It was cool in this game that you can play as a Big Daddy. The only relationship you had with them in the first game was fighting them or just walking past them. Here you actually get to experience it. There was a small bit at the end of Bioshock where you could play as a Big Daddy temporarily, or an imposter. Here you got to play as one, and you got to help the little sisters, which was a fun experience, and cool that you got to experience it at least in one of these games. However, my reasoning for having this in last place is, as I mentioned, this feels like a continuation of Bioshock, the original. Obviously it takes place in Rapture, the underwater city. Following the ending of Bioshock, it's lost a lot of its mystery and its charm. It still looks visually stunning, but you kind of know the secrets to it, and the truth behind it doesn't really feel as appealing as what it once did. And that's to say, it doesn't really add anything new that we didn't really know at all. The story itself treads familiar ground, just a bit weaker in terms of the characters and the plot itself. It has its moments, but overall the game, it's a solid follow-up, but one which doesn't really introduce us to anything. It just makes us feeling like we're playing like a long DLC of the first game with like a side story kind of thing. Nothing new, but still a very solid game. Now, last place was an easy choice, but these top two are really hard. So coming in at second place is Bioshock Infinite. This being the latest, I say latest, it was nearly 10 years ago when they released this game, but this is the last inclusion in the series thus far. It's an amazing game, but obviously something has to be top, and it's really hard when you're picking two amazing games and another game which is fairly good. And in this ranking there's going to be a lot of comparisons to other games because that's an easy way to do it. So in Bioshock 1 and 2, it takes place in Rapture, which I mentioned is the city underwater, under the ocean. Here we're high up in the sky, so it's like a big flip on itself. It's quite opposite, whereas right from the beginning of Bioshock you could tell this place is chaotic. In Bioshock Infinite, when you're up in Columbia, which is the city in the sky, if you went into that not knowing about the other games, you'd think, oh, this is a paradise, but then when you make a certain decision, things turn south and it's kind of disastrous. It's kind of chaotic in some ways, but also kind of civilized in a way. You know, Rapture was this dark underwater place where people were dying left, right and centre. Here, it's, you know, sunny, beautiful, everyone's polite, but then once you make a certain decision, everything changes. Everything just seems too perfect to be true, and obviously that's the case. What happens? The look of Columbia itself was amazing. It's this mixture of this old American city and advanced technology which allows it to float in the air. What is interesting about these games is they do take place in like the 60s, I believe. Scientists and inventors allow for things like this to happen, for it to be in the sky and under the ocean. Sky rails were introduced in this game for the first time, which allowed for a more unique kind of progression of the story, I guess you could say. And even in some fights, you could, if you're low on health, you could change to a different spot to regain your health, or if you're trying to get an advantage over your enemy, you can do that as well. Or even surprise attacks, because you can do stealth attacks off them and kill them from jumping off of them and then hitting them with your hook. I really liked the cleaner layout of this game. In the first game, another comparison, you could store up to 7 medkits, I think, and then just, heal yourself when you need to. The same goes for plasmids. Here, you're only allowed 1 full bar of something, but you can easily top it up. I thought that was nice to keep track of everything. It was nice and simple. We didn't have to worry about all the things you have in your inventory. They actually changed the name of the plasmids to Vigors here. It brought back some old ones and it brought in some new ones, which were all great and very useful. You had use for all of them. It might sound dumb, but a real big improvement on this game, which helped me enjoy it a lot, made it go smoother, was I actually like the controls. I'll talk about the controls in Bioshock later on, but here it was very smooth and it really did feel like an FPS here. And I won't dive too much into the story itself, but we kind of got an explanation for things for this whole franchise, which, although confusing, at least we got an in-depth answer, and at least we got an answer to this mysterious tone in each of these games. Maybe not Bioshock 2. In a lot of games I've played, there have been side characters who either just stand there, get in the way when you're fighting people, or they join in fighting, but they don't really hit their shots or they do no damage to the enemies. Here we have this Elizabeth, who's a real important part of this story, as well as actually being really convenient. She doesn't actually fight in the battles, but she can hand you ammo, health, anything when you need it. There's something else you can do, but I don't want to go into that as well, even though this game is like 8 years old. One thing she can also do is give you money, or silver eagles as they're called in this game, and that is a problem I had with this. It's obviously not a major deal, but you could get money way too easily in this game, meaning you could buy all these upgrades, all these things which, on paper you're like, oh yeah, more the better, but in the other game you felt like you had to work for some things, you had to kill to get this money or whatever. Here it was literally handed to you on a plate or thrown to you, so it kind of lost that survival feeling to it in some areas where you could just easily buy things. And to continue with some more negative things, as this is up in the sky, it's open, you can breathe the air on the outside, whereas underwater, you're in claustrophobic space. I wasn't really as creeped out or scared going into fights as I was there, and people couldn't really just jump out on me because it was all lit up and in the open. So it kind of lost that kind of creepiness to it and didn't feel as much like a thriller or horror game. It more focused on the FPS, which is a good thing, but it sacrificed some of those creepy tones. And just to quickly cap off my review for this in a negative way, there were frustrating things with the story as well. You'd get to a certain destination, they'd tell you, oh, before you can do this you have to do something else, or it gets interrupted. And that happened on the same spot about 3 times. Not from me not completing something, it's part of the story, it's a cutscene. Some points got really repetitive on that front and frustrating, but nonetheless, a really great game, as you can tell. Don't let my negatives weigh it down. It's easy to pull out a lot of negatives from a video game compared to a movie, as their duration are normally over 10 hours long. Which leads me into my final pick, and that is Bioshock, the original from 2007. This is a very special game, and I mentioned the release date, 2007. This is just so much more than an FPS. In fact, that's probably one of the weaker parts of it, the combat itself. Obviously, it's early days for this genre, I guess you could say, but this game is so much more. It's really creepy, actually. I was really unsettled. Now, I don't get unsettled much from games or movies, whatever, but this really unsettled me at times, especially with my headphones in late at night. Now, I've seen reviews from when this game was first released, so many years ago, and they praised this game for its sound design. you know, the sound effects that come off the people, the sound effects off of Rapture itself. And I'd agree to a certain extent. You know, when you kill someone or hurt someone, you can hear their screams. There's creepy, eerie audio coming off of the whole city. But one thing, this is an odd one. The audio design in the characters' volume in relation to the distance between you and them, it wasn't actually good on a realistic front, because you could be far away from this person and you can hear them, like, especially with your headphones in, it feels like they're whispering right in your ear. And I can like turn around, do a 360, not see anyone and be really creeped out. I think that might be part of it. If not, it still does its job really well. That's what adds to the creepiness. And it constantly has you cautious, because they don't always make noises when they're around you. You can just walk into a room and they're, you know, cutting someone up or hiding in a cubicle. And I found that really special about this game. That was really creepy. You know, you'd hear them whispering in your ear. You walk through a door which is on the other side of the room and they would be there, and they're nowhere near you, but it sounds like they're right next to you talking. And just the things they say, it's really random stuff, but really creepy. It just shows how insane these people have gone, which, as I referred to in this video before, people are chaotic, and you can see that from the start of this game. While keeping on the topic of sound, I have to praise this soundtrack. It is so good. I mentioned these games, they take place, or at least this one takes place in the 60s. So to remind you of what time this takes place, the soundtrack fits it superbly. And not only does it remind you of what time, but just fits this tone really well. It's kind of my medicine in a way. You know, you could be creeped out by some of the things, but then you'd have that music. You know, you'd feel more relaxed and make you calm. What I talk to my friend about a lot is, because I recommend these games to him a lot, that the soundtrack is very, very similar to the Fallout games, which I really love the soundtrack on that as well. So they're both great soundtracks, so that's what I'd compare it to. And in terms of the story, it's good. You know, it's good, but it's not amazing on paper. But with this world, this city actually, this underwater city with all these creepy characters and people mixed in with other things like Big Daddies, Little Sisters, all that, it actually makes for a really, really good story. Mainly propelled by the world. And as I mentioned, there's this thing of mystery, because you're dumped into this place playing as this character who is experiencing everything for the first time, just like us. So everything's a new experience. You don't know what to expect at points. Obviously you know what to expect as the time goes on, but you know, it's a very special game, which in time leads to one of the best plot twists I have ever experienced in a video game. And it's quite amazing that I didn't know about it, since I played this game last year for the first time, and it's like many, many years old now, so it's a very special game, one which I would recommend to anyone. It might not be for everyone, but a very special game, especially for people who are big video game fans. This is one you have to try out. Now, surprisingly, I actually have a few negatives to say about this. As I mentioned, there's a lot of things you can pick out from any game, no matter how good they are, because there's such a long duration. Now, I had a bit of gamer rage with a certain point of this game. It gets to the final quarter, the final push of this whole game, the campaign, and I'm someone who searches thoroughly for ammo, for Easter eggs, for every little thing. I don't leave a room unturned. It got to this point at the very end where, as the game progresses, you can upgrade your weapons, you know, make them stronger, but also the villains get hard to kill, and especially when there's loads of them. Now, as I mentioned, I can get as much ammo as I could and all the health and all that, but there was a point of this game where I literally used up every single piece of ammo in each gun, and I had to resort to just running in with a wrench and hitting everyone, inevitably dying but then respawning and then doing it all again. So, you know, like taking off a little bit of their health, dying and then coming back to finish the job. I had to do that so long. It took me like an hour and a half to do. This was a part which, you know, on paper you're just meant to wipe everyone in the room and then you can progress to the next part, but I had to do that. And for all my troubles with that, I got to the final boss scene and it ended within like 2 minutes. It was extremely underwhelming. Definitely one of the weaker parts of this amazing game. But probably the thing I disliked about this game the most, I talked about it, is the controls, especially in combat. So what I'm used to, hang on, I'll get my controller. What I'm used to, you know, L2 to scope in or aim, R2 to shoot, X to jump, you know, all those sort of things, you know, R3 to sprint, or sometimes when you're not dealing with a gun it's R2. Here, there was no sprinting. Well, I looked everywhere I could for sprint and there was nothing, so if there is a sprint, I'm not apologising for not doing it because they didn't make it clear. Scoping in was R3. You know, the toggle you move in to push it in. You know, you got used to it as time went on. But that's how you like aim in. And that made its way into Bioshock Infinite, which I was fine with. You know, you got adjusted to it by then, but like to jump it was triangle. I can't really complain as this game was out before most of the games, which made me get used to these controls, but it was really difficult to adjust at first, and at times I'd, you know, go to zoom in with my gun while doing stealth, but then because L2 is the one to shoot your plasmids, I'd do that and then give my position away. So just things like that were very frustrating, but those are just some things which are a bit weak in such an influential game for the video game franchise and FPS. Don't let that take anything away from these magical games, I guess you could say. So that was my ranking of the 3 Bioshock games. I'm going to have it up on screen just so you can get a visual look of it, and I'm actually going to chuck up my scores as well so you can see them and compare them to every other game on this list. So coming in last, I obviously had Bioshock 2, which I gave an 83%. You know, it's a solid game, it's good. If you took away the first game, it would be better, but because you know what happens and everything's familiar, that's what let it down. But yeah, I gave an 83%, which isn't a bad score. For a video game, it's not amazing. In movie terms, that would be good, but it's not amazing, but it's not bad. It's good, it's solid. That's what I can say about it. Now, these top 2 is where it got really difficult, and I gave both Bioshock Infinite and Bioshock a 92%, so they were very dominant over Bioshock 2, so it was hard to pick over them, but as ambitious as everything that happens in Bioshock Infinite, I just resonated with Bioshock, the original one, more, and it was such a game changer for every video game out there, so I just found it very special and mysterious. I have Bioshock maintaining first place, which you don't see too much with these video games, especially with one which is this old. Fair play to it, it is a veteran of the gaming industry. But yeah, please let me know what your ranking would be, and if you're interested in seeing any other video game rankings, I've only done one more than this, I believe, and that was the Uncharted one many months ago. It must be coming up to a year now, because at the end of the month I would have had this channel for a year. So yeah, please make sure to like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate that, and I hope to see you in my future videos.